What do lithium-ion batteries, agar-agar, and gel pens have in common? If you guessed Japan, you're in for a show. Today's podcast is going to talk a little about the influence Japan has on the West, some things that are in Japan but not in North America, and the difference in day-to-day life of Japan and North America. Let's get real, y'all.
Thoughts.
Facts.
Ideas.
Let's get real. Welcome to Let's Get Real, the only podcast that has the original host pay the guest host in sushi dinners. My name is Alex Mason, and I'm your guest host, as Abby's away this week and will return next week. Now, Japan has had a lot of influence here on the West. As a self-proclaimed fan of nearly everything involving Japan, the first thing that comes to mind is anime. My first exposure with anime was with the late 90s, early 2000s YTV, after school, late evening, and weekend programs, and then I saw shows like Pokemon, Sailor Moon, Inuyasha, and Witch Hunter Robin. Since then, anime has exploded here in the West, with Netflix now having a variety of different anime to watch, ranging from the new Pokemon Sun and Moon anime series to Fairy Tail and to Agretsuko, as well as dedicated streaming services such as Crunchyroll and Funimation for both animated and live-action Japanese shows. It isn't just American animation that got influenced. Even our live-action Hollywood films here have been influenced by Japan, mainly particularly by one man. His name was Akira Kurosawa, and he was a Japanese filmmaker that was born on March 23rd, 1910, and he passed away on September 6th, 1998. And the key thing that a lot of us know that he's influenced for is the way that the battle sequences are shot. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, or The Matrix Reloaded, for example, those two movies alone on how the battles go and how the action sequences is influenced by this man. And probably from the film Seven Samurais, which is probably his most famous film. This man, by the way, Kurosawa, had a 50-year-plus career and made 30 films. And I haven't yet to watch any of them yet, but I plan to, and I've heard they're amazing. Now, there's a lot more information I could go into detail, but unfortunately there is a time crunch that I'm on, so I'm actually going to refer you to a video that I found on Vimeo, and it's called From Seven Samurais to Fury Road, which is by a man named Fandor, and it is a video that goes in-depth, that explains Kurosawa's work and how his visuals, plots, and even his dialogue influence the directors to this day. Like, there's even a thing about A Bug's Life. That animated movie was inspired by Kurosawa's work. It's crazy. Of course, I can't forget about video games. I'm a huge gamer, and I do play a lot of Japanese release titles, like the aforementioned Pokemon, Final Fantasy, and Persona series. However, sometimes the popularity is different in both countries. Here in North America, Pokemon is extremely popular, and I see a lot of cosplays at the Anime North and Con Bravo conventions that I go to, and I still see a lot of people play Pokemon Go. Heck, in the States, we have even seen Pokemon floats at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. However, there is a series that is equally as popular in Japan, but it hasn't reached that same level here in North America, and that series is Dragon Quest. Now, I'll do my best to sum up Dragon Quest for the uninitiated, but it usually is a turn-based combat fantasy series mainly involving an unnamed hero saving the world with their ragtag team of party members that you can sometimes customize at the start or tame later throughout the story, and depending on which incarnation you're playing, are able to change their classes so they can gain different abilities. There's also lots of monster fighting, and you go around solving people's problems, sometimes their own, sometimes not, depending on the game. And, standard role-playing game stuff. Funny enough, the Dragon Quest series was influenced by the West instead. That influence in particular are games like Wizardry and the turn-based role-playing game aspect that are in video games that weren't really popular back then or even heard of back in Japan. The popularity for Dragon Quest is crazy over there, even more so than with us here with Pokemon. I'm being completely honest with you. Dragon Quest has statues in some places in Japan, they have Dragon Quest themed cafes, and there are even, at some different points in time, slew of benches that are all Dragon Quest themes. It's like a large place for you to gather and play. And an example of this is actually in a YouTube video by my favorite YouTuber, Simon and Martina, formerly known as Eat Your Kimchi, in a video called Japan Invites Simon/Martina Day 2. And it's actually a really good video to get an idea on how popular Dragon Quest is by just seeing those benches. But that's not even all. Dragon Quest popularity is rising like crazy. The latest rendition, which is Dragon Quest XI, has sold over 3 million copies to date. That's insane. If you like turn-based combat and you're actually a fan of Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest might be a good series for you. If you want to try it out, there is a demo available on the Nintendo eShop for the Nintendo Switch, which will be selling the definitive edition for Dragon Quest XI, and it should be coming out later in September. If you don't want to wait, the original version is available on PlayStation 4. Now, I've only talked about the influences that the West and the East have on each other, but I haven't talked about what's the difference between North America and Japan. And I haven't been to Japan, so how am I going to do that? Well, we're in luck. One of my very good friends, Bessie McNaughton, has been to Japan twice, and she has agreed for an interview for this podcast. So here is the lovely interview with Bessie.
Let's get real.
First of all, Bessie, thank you so much for doing this interview with me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, I have a few questions about Japan for you. First of all, how many times have you gone to Japan?
I've been there twice.
When?
First in August of 2016, and second in May and June of 2017.
Cool. So, what did you do there on both of those occasions?
Okay, so mostly vacation, I would say. In 2016, I stayed in Tokyo with a childhood friend of my mother's who is Japanese. And in 2017, I went on an exchange sponsored by my university. There were 4 of us Canadian students, and we went to a university in Japan where we each spent a month living with the host family. And then after that, I did some traveling for 2 weeks. That was in Osaka.
How was that?
Both of those were very nice.
What were the key differences between living in Japan and in Canada in regards to your day-to-day life? I think this would probably more apply to when you were with your host family, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely some differences that I could see on both occasions. The weather was quite warm both times, and so something I got into doing was drinking cold, unsweetened tea. And so in Tokyo, and I remember when I got back to Canada and it was still hot in September, I started to really miss the tea. I went around trying to figure out how I could get this particular tea, but I still don't exactly know, honestly. But it was like a wheat tea or something. I don't know. It's not exactly tasty, but it's sort of more satisfying than water. Anyway, I missed it. There are a number of standard flavors that are different in Japan. Like melon is a standard flavor for candy and for pop. And green tea is a standard flavor for desserts. In fact, soft serve ice cream, the standard flavors were vanilla and green tea. And I found that very fascinating because you would see these big plastic ice cream models, and there would be one that would be white, and then the other one, instead of being brown, it would be a vibrant green.
That is different. But it's like in regards to like your commute when you were going to school compared to now, or living with your host family, like were there any real differences?
Okay, let's see. One thing that was different is that Japanese food is often served in multiple plates and bowls, and so every meal I felt like it was worthy of taking a picture. Because you'd have like your little bowl of white rice, and then there would be a little bowl of miso soup, and little bowls of other things, maybe a teeny tiny plate with some pickled vegetables. It felt like every meal was a work of art. And this was true of both my mother's childhood friend and the host mother. So that was one thing that was different. Because at home, certainly, I would either put all the food on one plate, and oftentimes you serve yourself.
Yeah.
The woman I stayed with, the host mother the host mother I stayed with in Osaka, she was a stay-at-home mom, but the woman I stayed with in Tokyo was a university professor who was on break for August, but I kind of had come to expect a sort of a different standard of I would have thought the university professor would cook more like we did here, but it's apparently is different. One thing also that I noticed was that the room with the toilet in it and the room with the sink in it are often separate rooms.
Really?
Yes. I did not like that because it meant I had to touch the doorknob and walk down the hall even before I could wash my hands after using the toilet. So that was an unfortunate element of the host family time in Osaka. The bathroom I would use in Tokyo had them in one room, but certainly the one on the main floor also had the sink just in a room just outside the room with the toilet. And how I went to some of the other host families' houses in Osaka, and they had similar setups. Only one place had the bathroom fully down the hall from the sink, but I just, even after living there for weeks, I would still think, why?
Fair. Now, I know that for the 2 weeks on your second trip, you did do school there. What's the difference like between school here, I think in this case it would be comparison to university here, versus university in Japan?
Yes, it was a university. The school that we went to was an Anglican university, actually. It was founded by foreign missionaries, and the university that I go to, well, I'm in a subsection of that is also founded by Anglicans, and so that was how they had connected with each other. Actually, they had quite a few connections. So 2 of the English professors at this university were Canadians, one from out east and another one from around Banff. And one of the culture professors had studied the Mennonites of St. Jacob's. And so, yeah, this place had quite a few connections. So his interest in the Mennonites of St. Jacob's was that he was interested by the fact that they were minorities, but they weren't minorities, like, if they were to change their clothes, you would never know that they were a minority community. And so Japan also has some minority communities who don't look any different from the regular Japanese society, which sort of gives the false impression that there are no minorities in Japan. But that's not true.
Was the teaching there any different than compared to here? Was your day any different?
Well, we were more sort of guests, so naturally any class we went to sit in on, it would be sort of a special day. But one thing that was interesting was that they didn't allow absences. Here in university, the idea is as long as you show up for the written tests, you can get away with never coming to class.
This does not apply to all classes, by the way. I've had a few fair of my classes have at least half my grade be worth of attendance.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I have never had a university class with more than maybe 15% attendance.
I'm coming from a college perspective, and it was a very rare 1 or 2 class that did that, and they were both actually electives that happened.
Interesting. So at this university, if you missed 1/3 of the classes, you would fail the class, regardless of how the rest of your grades were.
Wow, that's strict.
Yeah. So all 4 of us exchange students were quite fascinated by this, but it meant that the resulting behavior was that some of the students would come to class and not pay attention and just talk to their friends, and we really wondered, why did they show up at all? And so the teachers explained, well, they need to get the credit, right? And so this was, from that point on, something that we would explain as our perspective as Canadians. In fact, one of us said that he had a teacher who was so bad that he said, okay, I'll just read the textbook, and stopped going to class. He said it worked out fine for him. I don't have that kind of confidence in my ability to study on my own, but I mean, the point is you can do it, and it was a perfect example of why we were mystified by anyone who would come to a university class without, intending to focus. But theirs was a different system, so it was interesting.
What was traveling like to and from school in Japan compared to here?
It was actually very similar to here. In Tokyo, of course, I used the train all the time, which is not normal.
We do have LRT now, so...
We do, but in Tokyo, the couple I stayed with are both university professors at different universities and for different subjects, but both of them would commute to work by train every day. They owned a car, but we took it out once as sort of a novelty so they could go to a faraway location and also give me a sense of what driving was like. But to them, driving was like the less appealing option. They would much rather commute to work by public transportation, even though they were well-to-do people, well advanced in their career. That's just not how it is here. You want to get rich enough that you don't have to take public transportation.
I also assume Japan's public transportation is much better than what we have here, at least in the city that we both live in.
It is. It's like New York, where sort of all the cars on the road are taxis or other professional drivers. Tokyo is so big that you would not want to drive if you could avoid it.
Any big city, even like Toronto. Like, I'd rather take public transit in Toronto if I could, instead of driving and dealing with a bunch of traffic.
Yeah, that's fair. In Osaka, I took the bus to school, and so that was more like it is here. Although there were a couple of differences. One is that people actually line up when you're waiting for the bus, which is fine, but the first time I was waiting for the bus, I sort of looked at my phone and didn't realize that people were actually trying to form a line, and I was just randomly sort of standing in the middle of the sidewalk. So I acted properly after that. Once I realized what all you had to do is pay attention. And the other thing in Osaka was that people get on the bus from the middle of the bus, and then you get off from the front door. So the opposite of how we do it here, and also the opposite of how they do it in Tokyo. So I thought I knew how to use the bus in Japan.
Wow.
But it was sort of backwards.
That's very different.
Yeah. You would take like a ticket or swipe your pass, and then when you got off, you would either swipe your pass again to have it charge your charge card, or the ticket would say what stop you had got on and then give you the amount you needed to pay now to get off at that stop.
Oh, okay, so you pay after.
Yeah. One thing that's different, I guess, is that in our city it's a flat rate no matter how far you go. But
yes.
In Osaka, it was a different rate for how many stops you went by.
Okay, that's actually really interesting.
It usually resulted in me paying more, actually, for a single trip than I would around here.
Would make sense, actually.
So I paid like $7 to go across the city one day, and I'm so used to the idea that it's a flat rate, whether you're on for 5 minutes or 50 minutes, that I felt like I was getting ripped off, even though that's the standard rate there.
Were there not any passes that you get about, like a day pass?
Yes, but I was only in the particular town. I mean, my usual. I got a unlimited rides within a specific area pass for Osaka, but I spent a few days in a town called Hamamatsu, and so I was hitting a bunch of different tourist sites.
Ah, okay.
And so I wanted to go from the city center to like a theme park on the edge of town, and so that was quite the journey.
That's very interesting. Now, something that we both that you have not mentioned, but I remember because obviously you're my friend and you told me about this trip before, is that you went to a convention in Japan.
Ah, yes.
For those who don't know, myself and Bessie are actually big con goers. We like to go to Con Bravo, Anime North, for example. As we both go to conventions, and what was the difference between, like, a convention in Japan compared to a convention here?
Well, I wouldn't say I've really got a good grasp on the convention scene, since both of the events I went to were primarily for small press sellers, or doujinshi, as people often call them, in the otaku community, both in Japan and in Canada. So, like, they write their own original novel, or based on a work of existing property, they'd write their own novel or comic book and then sell it to people.
Yeah.
And so both of the events I went to that was a big part of it. And then the other big part was showing up in your cosplay and having people take photos of you. Those would be sort of the two main aspects of both of the events that I went to. And so if there were other elements to it, I would not really be aware of them. Presumably there was some networking that went on. But things like the dealer's room or panels, I didn't see anything like that at the events that I went to.
That's actually really interesting. So there is that whole people taking pictures of your cosplay aspect, which is same here. But how do you pronounce it again, sorry?
Doujinshi.
Doujinshi?
Yeah.
I apologize for my enunciation.
You can just call them self-published books.
Or self-published
books. That's what I usually do when speaking to people outside of the community.
The self-published books, they don't exactly well, they do exist here.
I'd say it's like Artist Alley.
It's kind of like Artist Alley. I have seen, actually,
But much bigger.
Yeah, much bigger. I actually did see at Con Bravo one year an acquaintance of mine who is a self-published author. She was selling her book in the Artist Alley at Con Bravo.
Okay.
But it's not a very common sight to see that. I've maybe seen one per con. Maybe.
I would say I see a handful of people selling their own comic book in Artist Alleys, but it's true. It's mostly people just selling posters and so on.
And fan art.
Yeah.
So, when you came back to Canada, did you notice that anything you did in Japan was also here in the West that you didn't notice before?
Well, there are Asian markets, so I was convinced that I must be able to find that unsweetened tea I had come to love in Tokyo. But I was never able to find it, especially since the Asian markets often sell Korean, Chinese, and other Asian brand products. So even if it was the exact same tea, if I can't understand what the word for it is in Korean, then I could walk by 100 bottles of the tea I want to drink, and I will still miss it, unfortunately.
Unfortunate.
Let's see. Oh, there was one thing that I did miss in Japan as well that I came to appreciate, which was that in Japan you can buy bread in 2, 4, or 6 slice packages.
Oh, that is convenient.
And at first I saw that and I thought, why would you buy 2 slices of bread individually? But honestly, I've come around to the idea that would actually be very convenient if you're going away for a bit, or you just don't eat that much bread. Even just something smaller than the full loaf that you can buy here.
Oh, yeah. Did you take anything from living in Japan that you do now? So, like, any sort of habit, per se?
Sometimes when I'm making a meal, I want to put it on multiple plates to look pretty, but then I think about the plates that I own and how much space it would take up, because they have all these little compact dishes, and those you can sort of Tetris together onto someone's placemat, and it works out. But I'd have to buy a whole new set of dishware if I wanted to start saying, okay, here's the plate that's like 7 centimeters wide, and I'm just going to put a few pickled radishes on it. Okay. And now here's another plate that's 15 centimeters wide, and I'm going to put some miso soup into it. It's, all the bowls I have are I guess I've got some bowls that you're supposed to put ice cream in. Those are pretty small. Maybe I could do something with that.
So you have the urge to do it, but not the will, necessarily. Or the ability to, because you lack the proper equipment.
Yeah, there's a T&T nearby that opened that opened last year, so I probably could buy the stuff, but then I'd have to put it somewhere in my house, and frankly, it's not worth it.
Also, there's New City Mart, the one in downtown Kitchener, right beside it, is connected by the same company. They sell just, like, bowls, plates, anything that's not food-related.
Oh, cool.
And the one last question I have for you is, if someone were to go to Japan, what is the one thing you tell them that they have to do?
I wouldn't say there's any one thing that anyone has to do in Japan. There is so much to Japan that I think you should really do what you are passionate about. Because, for instance, Japan is a great country if you love cars, but I don't care about cars. And so I'm sure there's no end to fascinating things you could do. But for me, the most I ever thought about cars was when I would look at ones that were especially small or boxy and kind of go, tee. For me, though, my must-visit location in Tokyo was Tokyo Tower, because it's so iconic, and a number of non-otaku types didn't quite understand the appeal of Tokyo Tower, because Tokyo Tower is not that tall by modern building standards, and the newly opened Tokyo Sky Tree is much taller, and it serves all the functions that Tokyo Tower did in the old days. And it's got like a shopping mall in it, it's got a Pokemon store. I've been to Tokyo Sky Tree twice, and I have not actually been up to the top of Tokyo Sky Tree either time, because I was busy doing other things, and also it was cloudy because it was Tokyo in the summer, and that happens. But Tokyo Tower, I really enjoyed being able to go to the iconic red building that Godzilla destroys, and every other alien menace and otherworldly menace destroys in some manner. It's like the closest you can come to going and experiencing anime in real life.
That tower must have some expensive repair bills if it's been destroyed that much. Thank you so much, Bessie, for coming in today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Well, that's the end of Let's Get Real for today. Thanks to my best friend Andrew for helping me create topics, my roommate Justin for editing my script and correcting my facts, my friend Bessie for doing the interview, and of course, to Abby for letting me guest host. Abby will return in the next episode. Probably.
Thoughts.
Facts.
Ideas. Let's get real.